Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Good, and we're going to solve a problem today.
That's always good.
Very, very simple problem, except the conditions are a little complicated. You know, I don't think it's really very hard for a libertarian to understand the right of free speech, you know, in the First Amendment. You can, say essentially what, and the government shouldn't be regulating it. But, you know, it's confusing now, and I think some libertarians, including myself, there's a little bit of confusion, especially about the social media, because basically they claim they're a private company and they can do this and that, but all of a sudden they're starting to realize they are powerful people. They're exempt from litigation, and they've been an arm of the government. They provide the government for whatever they want, and yet at the same time, some libertarians, and I still have sympathy, they're private. You just can't tell them what they can put up and what they can't put up. Now they're involved very much in the campaign because, you know, this Biden issue, there's a lot of juicy stuff there. Ordinarily, this would come out, the old media, probably, whether they were so-called conservative or liberal, would report on this, you know. But now, you know, there's liberal media and social networks, and then there are private sources on the internet, and so there's a split. And now they're saying, well, the government's violating, the right of freedom of speech. You can't get it on, and they're making exceptions. And then they use their example. So it is a technical thing. I keep thinking, well, this problem has been created by the fact that we haven't had a good old-fashioned libertarian society, because it would have been solved by contracts, it would be solved by ownership, and it would be solved by the market and competition. But that's not what we have, and it's getting to be a very big deal. I also see it as a source of a great deal of social friction. You know, it's getting more vicious all the time. You know, you remember when I was in office, I used to really complain about the tone of emails. Two people working with each other, but the tone of their emails might be terrible. That's sort of what goes on the internet. The tone sometimes is even worse than what they're saying. But I think it's going to get worse, and it's mainly because of their lack of understanding and desire to have a libertarian approach that ownership should make these decisions without government interference whatsoever and no subsidies. But that is not what we have, and we have to do our best, because today we have Bob Wenzel making a good point, and he's very good on this. And then Greenwald, he makes some very good points there too. It makes you want to think about both sides of the argument.
It's a difficult issue, and it's also fascinating. I mean, the background is everyone knows it who's not been on, unless you've been on Twitter, then you won't know it because they banned it. But, you know, the New York Post apparently came into possession of this hard drive that it seems apparently that Hunter Biden, the vice president's son, turned in to get it fixed. And the story is a little convoluted, but, you know, somehow he copied the hard drive, and in that were all of these emails. Hey, put me on your board. Hey, here's some money. Want some money? You know, and this whole thing. And it's an investigative report. It came out of the New York Post. Very interesting. And then something extraordinary happened, which is that the social media companies said you can't put a link to that on here. And it's very troubling. Actually, let's look at a couple of. This is what happened to some pretty prominent people that did try to put the link up. Here's the White House press secretary's account. Her account was locked. The Twitter forced her to delete the link to the New York Post article if she wants to ever come back to Twitter. Twitter's justification was that article may put people in danger, which at first you might think, that sounds pretty funny, that sounds laughable. But then when you kind of think about it, there's a funny way of thinking about it. That might actually put Hunter Biden in danger, because if it exposes his shenanigans. But like you say, in the old days, you know, the liberal media was investigating Clinton. The conservative media, to a degree, was investigating Bush and this sort of thing. But there's a strange thing now where you can't even investigate this. I would think some crack reporters from the Post would jump on this and maybe prove it wrong, and then it blows up in Trump's face. But no, the chilling feeling about this is that you cannot discuss it.
See, I think the way I see this is that there's two things going on. One is the politics of it. The people who are out there arguing these cases, I don't think they even know what we're talking about. You know, the purity and freedom of speech and private property and contracts and this sort of thing. It's only a game they're playing on who can get one up on them on a political stand. Who can cheat the most, who can lie the most, who can get away with it, who can run the propaganda machine, and that's what they're dealing in. And once again, I think it's bipartisan. You know, that's the way it's been going on for a long time. But it is very, very vicious right now. And I also see this as leading up to the election, where the outcome of the election is something that could be a very big deal this time, more so than usual, especially if they don't have a declared winner. And even if there is a declared victor, it doesn't mean that people are going to declare him a winner because of the way this media works. You know, it's the lack of integrity that exists, and it just reminds me of the founders' concern. This thing, the Constitution and this republic we give you, it just doesn't work because you wrote this stuff down. And so even if we do sort all this out, you're back to the integrity of the people that was involved in this. And that, of course, I don't know how they could discuss that because I don't think they even care about that. When you see the Pelosi's of the world, you know, running things, and the Bidens of the world, and I could name a few Republicans too.
Oh yeah, plenty. The thing is, I mean, we're sort of talking in two different ways. You know, we're looking at the constitutionality, the legality of what they're doing. I also sort of, coming from a journalism background, I'm also looking at it from that perspective. It's shocking to me to hear major media outlets saying, we don't want you to read this, we don't want you to think about it. And it's, I think it has a chilling effect on the debate. Let's look at a couple more of these tweets. This is what kind of blew up last night. Here is the primary Twitter account of the New York Post. It just published these articles, has been locked because the stories violate the rules against distribution of hacked material. So they blocked the entire newspaper. It's actually the oldest continuously published newspaper in the U.S., as they pointed out in one other post founded by Alexander Hamilton. Here, put up the next one. This is interesting too. They blocked the official campaign Twitter account of President Trump. They blocked the campaign account for putting this out. And here's the final one. You referenced this earlier, Dr. Paul. This is a very good point. Do that next tweet if you can. This is from Glenn Greenwald, and he makes a good point on the journalism side. Look carefully at what Twitter is saying to justify censoring the Biden story. If applied consistently, it'd mean that some of history's most consequential journalism, the Pentagon Papers, WikiLeaks war logs, Snowden docs, Panama Papers, our Brazil archive, would be banned. That's a pretty strong statement, but I think there's something to that.
Yeah, there is, but I see the one shortcoming is it depends on whose ox is getting gored.
Yeah.
You know, these things are all serious. Now, if it was pointing out that in all these areas the Republicans were guilty, or on the opposite, or the Democrats are guilty, and then the people who are distributing this on social media will be biased. So yes, he's very logical on this, and good journalism, as you point out, you should have it. But it goes back to the integrity of the individuals. And right now, I think that might be what our society is suffering from the most, is the integrity of the people that are in charge of this. Of course, I think most libertarians understand that power corrupts, and yes, we're not going to have perfect people.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, that's one of the strongest arguments for a libertarian society is people aren't perfect, so that's why you don't give them this power and authority, because they will make mistakes. Instead of the mistakes being limited to your own self and your own property and your own well-being, when we send these people here, you get the Fauci's of the world and the Gates of the world who make the mistakes, and look at what we're facing today. So this is a very good point that he's making, because that's the last thing we'd want to do is make it more difficult for this information to get out. And most of this took a long time to get out.
Yeah.
Sometimes the materials that I read now, because I'm fascinated with this history, is there's always even more sorting out to do about the assassinations, the 1960s especially. That I try to read about that because I remember most people's names and I can remember the incidences that were going on at that time. So it's back down to the morality of the individual. But you know, I don't think that is much in the discussion. I think there was a little hint of people understanding that when we just went through this, hearings for the appointee to the Supreme Court, because she came across us a lot different, and people saw her differently. Of course, I'm sure there's some out there that say, "Oh no, she's the most evil," and they did. They tried to paint her as an evil person, but they don't really deal with the issues as much as grandstanding and making it personality, and they forget about the real issue here, and that is freedom of expression. That's why the First Amendment is great. The Congress shall write no laws.
Yes.
And then who's writing the laws? Well, the executive branch writes more laws than the congressional, the legislative branch. And then you also have the courts. Oh no, the courts would never write law. Maybe they had something to do with writing the law Roe versus Wade. So it's not following the rules that make the difference. Does that mean you just throw the rules away? No, I guess you look around for people that have an understanding. But where is the handicap? They all go to government schools. Not all, but the majority of people I knew in Washington went to government schools and government universities, or at least they were financed one way or the other.
Yeah, and the initial outrage and the continuing outrage over the banning and silencing of this is leading a lot of people to say, hey, let's nationalize Facebook, nationalize Twitter. And you and I are struggling. We've struggled before the show about what the right position is. It's not an easy issue. But I think we both agree, and a lot of people, that nationalizing would be the worst solution, to simply put it in the hands of government. Because if people think it's hard to criticize government now, imagine if you had a government bureaucrat in there running the show and deciding what can be and cannot be put up there. So it's not an easy solution. There are a lot of implications that go beyond the constitutionality of it, including freedom of the press, interference in elections, keeping information from people. I think it's clear that these companies do have an enormous amount of power.
Now here's one argument that points out why they need to do this, and they're not on our wavelength of the pros and cons of what can be published. They're doing it for safety. What you're saying is unsafe. And look, that comes up all the time. When we come up with a mask issue, they don't deal with it in the form of liberty, even though what they're doing under the principles of liberty. But they go there. It's always unsafe. And the people aren't supposed to know all this, and they figure that the elitists do. They have to know. But and sometimes they fight. And there's been more fighting between the parties over the issue. Usually, when it comes to the Kennedy assassination, a few other things, it can be very bipartisan. It's going to be a cover-up. Besides, we might need that some other time. But they use the excuse. They're humanitarians, and they're always doing what's best for the people. And they use that terminology or that tone when they sent you your little notice about Twitter.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, then we'll move on to the second topic, and this is a great piece we both read, written by Jordan Schachtel, about Scott Gottlieb. And I don't know if you used to watch Saturday Night Live. I used to watch it in the 70s, and there was a really funny skit where a retired baseball player said, "Baseball has been very, very good to me," in a strong accent. But I would say that COVID has been very, very good to Scott Gottlieb. It's put a lot of money in his pocket, as Jordan points out in this piece.
Right, and he was head of the
FDA until
FDA,
last year.
I think it was the spring of 19.
Okay,
just a short period of time. He's made a lot of money. His yearly income has skyrocketed. But I don't know, there's been a lot of people say this, depending on what side of the aisle you're on. But it's been recognized that there's a exchange between FDA and the drug companies.
Yeah.
And this was explicitly, he had his training there. He developed his contacts, and literally he was able to get some very, very good contracts for the companies he recognized. And this article said he made millions, but the companies that got the contracts make billions.
Yeah.
And of course, he's probably a pretty important person right now when we're dealing with these contracts for the vaccines. And it's going to be going on because I don't see any organized resistance in Washington. Everybody's begging, sooner,
Yeah.
do it. No, I don't care if it works or not, just give us the vaccine. Lines are forming.
Yeah.
Except we know, we're in touch with a few people, a growing number of people said, I am not taking the vaccine. So it's a contest right there. So we want to participate in that and encourage people to be a little bit cautious about just saying, line up, yeah, I need the vaccine.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about Gottlieb a few times on the show because he's always on CNBC and he's always doom and gloom. We've got a lockdown, we've got a shutdown, we've got to get a vaccine, we've got more testing. And Jordan does a great job in his piece because he simply lays it out. And I'm going to actually read a couple. These are the boards that Gottlieb joined after he left quote-unquote government service. Pfizer, the board of Pfizer, they're dealing with the COVID-19 vaccine. From Pfizer, he gets about $330,000 a year. Illumina, he gets about $500,000 a year. They work on COVID-19 tests. The Asian Inc., they don't say the amount. They work on, they have a coronavirus partnership with the FDA. Tempus, COVID-19 PCR test. AEI, American Enterprise Institute, he gets $210,000 from them, and he published a roadmap for ending the coronavirus, which calls for endless testing, and no normal until everyone is vaccinated. Faster Cures, they do COVID pharma drugs. NEA, New Enterprise Associates, they invest in healthcare interests. So he's getting millions and millions of dollars a year off of this COVID pandemic. And no wonder he's on TV screaming about we need more and more and more.
You know, once again, it sets the stage for people who don't like our system or even the relative freedom we have, and they paint everybody together. Anybody that's worked in the marketplace is part of this system of corruption. But this is the crony capitalism that exists. And I mentioned just a little while ago, that's the same thing that happens with the viruses too. You know, the government comes in and they start regulating, and then they say it's the free market that's doing this. At the same time, this is part of the strategy because they can use it, and then the people will get a little bit confused. They will, yeah, you're right about that. So that's why a philosophic position of private ownership and private contracts offers so much more, especially since the end results are so much better.
Yeah, indeed. And so, look with caution. I mean, look with hesitation when you hear Scott Gottlieb talking about how you need to have endless testing and endless vaccines because he's getting paid to do it. And really that brings up the issue of the media. Shouldn't the media reveal if this guy's coming on? Remember all the things with John Brennan and all the CIA guys who went on TV talking about all this stuff, never revealing how they're being paid or who they're contracting with afterwards. So it's pretty messy. But I guess we're going to move on now to.
I just want to finish up with a little bit of a positive notion about it.
We need it.
Because the internet, I look forward to the internet, although I don't understand all the mechanism of that. I always think it's competition out there, and I think there is. Yes, the social media and we get very frustrated with that, but we still have new groups that are springing up. Yeah. And a lot of information, I don't think anybody knows how much information is spread just by emails and different things going on. Otherwise, we wouldn't get so many people. There are some polls that show that 40-some% of the people don't have any plans on taking the vaccine. So I think there's out there. So if people get riled up, and I think that's going to be better than thinking they're going to change the Congress, and this election will change it, and all of a sudden we're going to have a constitutional Congress. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we want to talk for a second about one of our least favorite governors, and that's Gavin Newsom. He's the guy who said you can't take off your mask only to chew your food, and then he said, please come back to California, stop leaving. Well, he's got a little bit of hot water too, and we noticed an article saying that he might get the Whitmer treatment. And this is the governor of Michigan who had the Supreme Court of Michigan rule against her her reign of terror, really. But Gavin Newsom, he's got a bunch of lawsuits filed against him. But one of the ones that we looked at in this piece in Red State was filed by 2 California Assembly members, Kevin Kiley and James Gallagher. And they make some very good points, and it's making its way through the courts. And they're pointing out that he is now literally intoxicated with power because he's using the state of emergency to issue dozens and dozens of these COVID restrictions. But now he's all of a sudden introducing other executive orders that are not related. He put out an executive order last week, I think it was, saying all cars will be electric by 2030 or whatever the year is.
Yeah, this is neat. We didn't think it would spread to California for a long, long time, but it has. And in this case, we have to give a couple positive things to say about the courts. The courts have, awakened and given some rulings that give some people that hope that they ought to be following more of these, because there is a public sentiment out there. If they hear somebody doing it and it comes out and there is a result, even though it never gets on the evening news, they're not going to put it on the. If Newsom loses, I don't think there'll be a whole lot on the major networks, but there's going to be a lot of other people. This will be a measurement of the people who are frustrated, but just get knocked down and no encouragement, and they can't get their suits heard. Maybe, and I think the one, the case with Newsom, they were referencing the previous case. So these, even though they're statewide, they can help set a standard, and we just needed that. I think what I'm looking for the whole thing to snowball, and then maybe this election the ultimate test is, when are the people going to throw you out, throw these guys out, and then I think we would get new people in. Or if they wanted, I've got to stay here because they really need me, maybe I'll have to compromise a little bit. Maybe they'll change their attitude and allow us to go to the bar and to church.
Yeah.
Which one?
Not
you
at
go
the same
to
time.
Which one you go to first?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we noticed a good piece by the judge this morning, Judge Napolitano, and he has a great piece and has a great title. What if we all start to return to normal life now? And it's he does these what if things, and he modeled it after your speech that you gave once on the floor, and he does it periodically, and this is a very good one, and he makes some very, very good points in his article about just returning to normal life. It's a great piece, and we have it here with us. But he's.
Yeah, I sure hope, because his was a bit optimistic. He was very emphatic when it came up with the Constitution. Sometimes he'll find a technical point that will make us stop and think, well, maybe we don't have all the answers. But he didn't mince words when it came to, does the federal government have the right to come in and tell you what you have to put on your face?
Yeah.
And there was no hesitation. They have absolutely no right to do that. And a governor doesn't have a right to do that. And it's obscene that they get away with this. So, he has the ammunition if people are looking for it. And yet there's still so many people, we still see them out there being obedient, and they have to follow the rules, or their neighbors will turn them in. That's still the bugaboo for me, for the neighbors turning in and calling the officials because my neighbor doesn't wear a mask when he's mowing the lawn.
Yeah, it's the end of civilized society. But we'll have some links to these pieces if others want to read them, and there's some good ones. But I'm gonna wind it down. I just was gonna mention one other thing that is troubling. I hate to end on a bad note, but Dallas County has announced now that they are going back into lockdown. Are people dying in the streets? No, they're not actually. But, and this is the interesting part, this is why I wanted to bring it up to Dr. Paul. You may even want to say something about this. But they have introduced a color-coded chart for when you can go out, when you can't go out, when you can do this, when you can do that. And when I read that, it reminded me of the frenzy. Yeah, it reminded me of the frenzy after 9/11, where they came out with this crazy color code, different shades of magenta, you can do this and you can't do that. And it had a psychological effect, though. You saw a big red in the subway, and you're looking for Al-Qaeda or something. It had a psychological effect. And I'm just wondering that this county is using those same techniques and same tools, almost like it's gaslighting the population. Now, we're back to code red, stay at home, stay safe, which of course we know is the opposite of the truth.
Yeah, and I understand your frustration and why that's a negative, but just remember how that code stuff finally got ridiculed.
Yeah, ridiculed.
They were ridiculing people. What are we doing this for? Nobody could explain it. And it was sort of like flipping a coin. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, let's move this over again. So totally insane things do dissipate and they self-destruct. But let's just hope we're able to do that, because a lot of other things after 9/11 are still with
us.
it. Okay, before you make a closing statement, I want to make two little points here.
Sorry, yeah.
One, I don't think I mentioned yet about
the
French women.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
The French women now who are having babies are forced to wear masks. And I would suggest that they don't have the vaguest idea what medicine is all about or delivering babies. It's the
You know a bit about that.
dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Now here, if this is mainly in France, you'd think France would have more respect for their women or something. France sends in riot police to enforce mask wearing in France amid spike in new COVID-19 cases.
Cases,
You know, they're
yeah.
doing a lot more testing. There's a few more cases. So, but that is so bad. And you know, there are people fighting this. I hope this is one of those that next week you read, okay, they backed down.
Yeah, I mean, you've delivered a few babies. I mean, that has to be really bad for the women.
Psychologically, it's just horrible. But this whole idea of exchange of air, matter of fact, people who do natural childbirth do a lot of work with relaxation and breathing technique, and it's used all the time. Even if they haven't taken that course, it's sort of a natural thing, and they will listen to a coach, and they have coaches that it's just the expression. I think, to me, as a physician, the walking in, the expression on that patient's face gives me a lot of information.
That's true,
But no, we can't do that. And one other short comment. We wanted to sell vaccines to Iran, and they were going to pay their bill, but they can't get any. 2 million doses, and they can't get any, not because the newest sanction said you can't send in medicine, because we don't prohibit medicines going into Iran. They just prohibit the paying for it, the financial institute. So there again, our humanitarians up there doing this, once again, aggravating things, and whether it's China or Iran, they're just looking for a fight.
Well, Bill Gates has got a couple of dollars. Why doesn't he foot the bill and give the vaccines? No, he's too busy.
We'll send him a letter today.
Running the rest of our lives. But I would just close by just saying, I mean, I really have a strong sense that they're going to try to do the lockdowns again. They're morphing the seasonal flu into COVID. They're ramping things up. Dallas County wants to locking down again. They are ramping this up, and they're not going to let go until we tell them to stop. So we all need to think about what that means for each of us. They're not going to back off on their own. That much is clear. And they are hypocrites. Let's put up my last picture. This is from, I think it was from the hearing this week. Look at this, Dr. Paul. 3 members of the U.S. Senate, not social distancing, not wearing masks. Look at that. These are the people that yell at us, we better keep our masks on, we better keep away from each other. As we've seen over and over again, it's rules for thee, but not for me. So these are the people that are oppressing us, and they're not going to back off. So keep that in mind.
Very good. And I want to close by just refreshing everybody's memory about why there's so many shortcomings in what we're doing now in this coronavirus epidemic, they call it. And that is, there are certain areas that when I look at it and hear statistics, I have to look at it carefully and look for the other side of it, because it's the propaganda that we get to get the general population to go along with it. One is the testing. We get day in and day out, and then they come up with a test, and there are more cases, and they want to lock down again, and they don't follow the rules about the definition of cases and this sort of thing. So the testing is also unreliable in many ways. There's a lot of good virologists that say you don't really have a reliable test when you do it. I mean, it isn't like, yes, absolutely, you have it, tomorrow you have it, tomorrow next day you don't have it. It's not that accurate. So people should be more cautious and say, well, I read what the cases are going up and we have to do something about it. And also that then leads to data. How many people have died, how many people are sick with it, and the data is unreliable. it is extremely unreliable because there's somebody else that's going to refute it, but there's more people now challenging that, and there's more people out there now that are reporting the other side of the data that's available to us. But the third thing to be cautious about is the optimism and the anticipation of the vaccines. We should be very cautious. There's a history that vaccines aren't quite, the great things that they're made up to be. There's dangers in it, and it's hard for people who are not involved in it, and you're listening to it, and you don't know, who is it that I'm going to trust? Who should give us this information? And so the vaccine thing is yet to come. I would say if you get confused on that, just hold on. Don't be overly anxious. There's no reason to panic, and there's no reason to think that if next week you have a vaccine that you rush and get it. I just don't think that would be good medicine. I don't think that's good politics either. So I do, though, want to make sure our viewers know how much we appreciate you tuning in each day. And please come back soon to the Ron Paul Liberty Report.